Hey everyone! This is a quick reminder to subscribe and hit that like button. It lets me know that you are enjoying my content. Also, feel free to drop your suggestions for future stories in the comments below. Thank you for listening, and let's dive right in. I started working at IKEA about 2 weeks ago. Night shifts, mostly just restocking shelves, cleaning displays, and making sure everything looked perfect for the morning rush. It wasn't exactly my dream job, but I wasn't complaining. The pay was decent, the work was mindless, and best of all, no customers. No screaming kids using the display couches as trampolines. No couples arguing over whether a bookshelf was modern enough. No Karens demanding to speak to a manager over a missing screw in their flat-pack furniture. Just me, a few other employees, and a massive empty store for 8 hours straight. At least, that's what I thought. I quickly learned my job wasn't just about furniture. On my first night, I walked into the employee lounge a few minutes before midnight, still adjusting to the idea of being awake when the rest of the world was sleeping. The break room smelled like burnt coffee and cheap air freshener, and a tiny TV in the corner was playing some old sitcom at barely audible volume. Tom, my manager, was already there, leaning back in a plastic chair, flipping through a clipboard of paperwork like he was seconds from falling asleep. I had met him briefly during my interview, but he barely acknowledged me now. Just grunted, checked his watch, then grabbed something off the table and held it out to me. A yellowed piece of paper. I took it, frowning. "What's this?" Tom didn't answer right away. He just let out a slow, tired sigh like he'd done this 1,000 times before. Then he said, "Follow these rules, no exceptions. If you break one, you'll regret it." I snorted. "What, is this some kind of hazing thing?" Tom didn't laugh, didn't even smile. He just stared at me, face blank, like I had just asked if the sun was real. A weird feeling itched at the back of my skull. I glanced down at the paper, expecting some generic "don't slack off" rules, but that's not what I got. Rules for night shift workers. 1. Do not go near Section 34 after 1:13 a.m. If you hear knocking coming from inside a wardrobe, walk away. Do not open it. 2. The lights in the showroom should be off. If any of them are on, immediately turn them off. 3. If a customer approaches you after closing hours, do not engage. They are not real. 4. At exactly 3:07 a.m., you will hear an announcement over the intercom. You are not allowed to listen. Cover your ears, hum, or turn on your phone's loudest music. 5. Before clocking out, check the exit doors. If they lead to anything other than the parking lot, stay inside. Wait until they look normal again. I read the list twice, then once more for good measure. My stomach twisted. This wasn't a joke. Or if it was, Tom had one hell of a poker face. I shot him a look. "You serious?" Tom crossed his arms. "Very. I don't care if you believe it or not, but follow the rules, or you'll wish you did." He didn't sound threatening when he said it, just tired, like he'd given this exact warning to dozens of employees before me. And then, without another word, he stood up, grabbed his keys, and walked out, leaving me alone with a list of rules that sounded like complete bullshit. For a while, I just sat there, turning the paper over in my hands. There was nothing on the back. No "just kidding," written in tiny letters. No indication that this was some kind of weird prank. I stared at the rules again, trying to make sense of them. Section 34? Wardrobes knocking? Customers that weren't real? The intercom one was the creepiest. What the hell kind of announcement was so bad that I had to cover my ears? I sighed, stuffing the paper into my hoodie pocket. Whatever. I was here to work, not play along with some dumb hazing ritual. I grabbed my cart of supplies, checked my list of tasks for the night, and headed out onto the showroom floor. The store at night was different. Not scary exactly, just unnaturally empty. During the day, IKEA was a constant mess of people moving, talking, and touching everything. But at night, it was just aisles of silent furniture, arranged in 2 perfect layouts. Fake living rooms, fake kitchens, fake bedrooms, all staged to look as realistic as possible. But without people, it felt wrong. Like a life-size dollhouse, waiting for something to step inside. I shook off the thought and focused on my work. Nothing weird, nothing at all. So when 1 a.m. rolled around, I barely thought about the rules. But I should have. I really, really should have. By my second night, I had almost convinced myself that the rules were bullshit. I mean, nothing weird had happened yet. No phantom customers, No mysterious announcements, no doors leading to nowhere. Just rows of overpriced furniture, and me, pushing a cart full of stock, wondering how many nights it would take before I completely lost my mind from boredom. So naturally, I started slacking on the whole following the rules thing. That was my first mistake. I was working in Section 12, putting up a new lamp display. It wasn't particularly hard, but I was taking my time, making sure each one was angled just right, adjusting the little price tags, stepping back to admire my handiwork. Maybe I should have been paying attention to the time. But I wasn't. I was in the middle of adjusting a particularly stubborn lampshade when I finally checked my phone. 1:16 a.m. My stomach dropped. I was too close to Section 34, and I was past the cutoff. A sick, dread-filled weight settled in my chest as I slowly turned my head and realized I was standing directly in front of it. Section 34. It didn't look any different from the rest of the store, just another stretch of furniture displays, sleek wardrobes lined up in neat rows. But now that I was standing there, a horrible awareness crawled over my skin, like I was being watched. I took a slow, careful step backward. And then, knock. I froze. The sound was soft, a single, deliberate tap from somewhere inside the wardrobes. I tried to tell myself I was imagining it, that it was just the building settling, or maybe something shifting inside the display units. But then, knock, knock. Louder this time. My mouth felt dry. I turned my head slowly, my eyes locking onto the source of the noise. A massive white wardrobe, standing just a few feet away. It was one of those old-fashioned ornate pieces, the kind that looked like it belonged in a haunted mansion. The kind of wardrobe you'd expect to lead to another world. Except I had a horrible feeling that whatever was behind that door wasn't from Narnia. I took another step back. And then, from inside, a long, slow scratching, like nails dragging against wood. My entire body went rigid. The instinct to open the door crept up my spine. I don't know why. Some stupid, intrusive part of my brain told me I just had to peek inside. Just for a second. Just to see. My fingers twitched. And then the scratching stopped. For a moment, everything was silent. Then, bang! The whole wardrobe shook violently, rattling against the showroom floor like something was trying to break out. I ran. Didn't think. Didn't look back. I just sprinted, legs pumping, breath ragged, weaving between furniture displays like a rat in a twisted maze. I didn't stop until I was in the complete opposite section of the store, bent over, hands on my knees, gasping for air. My heart was slamming against my ribs, my legs were shaking, and for the first time since I started this job, I was genuinely considering quitting on the spot. But I didn't. Instead, I forced myself to stand up, straighten my jacket, and keep moving. Because as much as I wanted to believe I had imagined it, I knew I hadn't. And I knew one thing for certain. I was never stepping near Section 34 again. By my third night, I had almost convinced myself that I had imagined the knocking in Section 34. Maybe it was just the building settling. Maybe my sleep deprivation was making me hear things. Maybe I was just being paranoid. Yeah, that had to be it. Because if I let myself believe what happened that night, if I truly accepted that something had been inside that wardrobe, knocking to get out, I'd lose my mind. So I told myself it wasn't real. That the rules were just a weird store tradition, a way to scare new employees into quitting. But the lights? Yeah, the lights were real. I was sweeping through the showroom, half zoned out, just going through the motions. The silence of the store was unnerving, as always. Just me, the faint hum of the air conditioning, and the occasional creak of the shelves. Then, out of the corner of my eye, a light. One of the stage showroom setups had its lamp turned on. For a second, my brain didn't even register it as wrong. It just looked normal, like something out of a cozy apartment display, warm light spilling over the fake coffee table, casting soft shadows against the perfectly arranged furniture. It looked lived in, like someone had been sitting there just moments before. A chill curled down my spine. I knew the rule. And after what happened in Section 34, I wasn't taking any chances. I gripped my broom tighter, trying to ignore the way my pulse had started racing. Slowly, I stepped forward. With every step, the lamp seemed to glow brighter, almost like it was reacting to me. I reached for the switch, and the moment my fingers brushed against it, the light turned off by itself. I froze. The showroom was dim again, the only glow coming from the distant green exit signs. But something felt Wrong. Like the air had become thicker, pressing down on my chest. I swallowed hard and leaned down just to check something, and the second I did, my stomach twisted. The lamp wasn't plugged in. In fact, there was nowhere to even plug it in. That's when I heard it. A soft, dragging sound against the floor, like claws scraping against tile. I turned around instantly, and that's when every single light in the showroom turned on at once. Blinding white. I gasped, stumbling backward as my vision exploded with brightness, the sudden shift making my head pound. For a split second, I was blind, my eyes burned as they adjusted, and when I finally looked around, there was nothing. No coworkers, no customers, just me and the lights. The scratching sound returned, and this time, it was closer. I froze. I could feel it. Something was behind me, watching, waiting. I didn't turn around, didn't move, didn't even breathe. Instead, I reached up with shaking hands, unscrewing the light bulb in front of me as quickly as I could. The moment it came loose, everything went dark. Not just the one lamp, all of them. The scratching sound stopped. I stood there, gripping the loose bulb, my breath coming out in short, shaky gasps. Silence. It was gone. The lights didn't turn back on. I set the bulb down on a fake nightstand, my fingers trembling. I didn't know what the hell had just happened, but I knew one thing for sure. From that night on, I followed the rules like my life depended on it. Because maybe it did. By my 5th night, I had developed a routine. Music blasted in my ears all night long to drown out the silence. The lights, I knew how to handle them. Section 34 didn't exist to me. And the man? Well, he hadn't shown up yet. But tonight felt different. It was around 3:06 a.m. when I checked my phone and my stomach dropped. 1 minute before the intercom rule. I didn't question it. I didn't hesitate. I yanked out my earbuds, hands fumbling as I pulled up my music app and cranked the volume to max. The dull buzz of the overhead lights filled the showroom as I stuffed the earbuds back in, just in time for the store's intercom system to crackle to life. A low, static-filled hum vibrated through the ceiling speakers, cutting through the silence like a blade. The sound was wrong, not the usual store-wide announcements I was used to. This was something else. Something. And then, a voice. "Attention all employees, please." I froze. The words slithered through the static, layered, distorted. Not one voice, too many. Like dozens of people whispering, mumbling, and screaming all at once. Some voices spoke in English, others in languages I didn't recognize. Some were sharp and clear, others warped and distant, like they were coming from underwater. A few whispered softly, they felt like they were right beside my ear. I clamped my hands over my ears, but I could still hear them. My stomach twisted as my brain struggled to process it all. The voices were overlapping, melting together, forming an incoherent wall of noise that made my skin crawl. Some voices pleaded, some sobbed. Some just laughed. I squeezed my eyes shut, rocking on my heels, trying to force it out of my head. And then I heard my own voice. "Attention all employees." I screamed. Didn't think, didn't care if anyone heard me. I just screamed. As loud as I could. For a solid 10 minutes, I yelled until my throat felt raw, until my lungs burned, until my ears rang with nothing but my own horrible, shaky voice. And then, silence. Like a switch had been flipped. The intercom cut out, leaving only the distant hum of the lights above me. My chest heaved, my body trembling as I gasped for breath. It was over. It was finally over. And for a split second, I thought I was safe. Until I heard it. Breathing. Right behind me. Every muscle in my body locked up. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. I could feel it. Something standing just inches from my back. Not touching me. But waiting. My instincts screamed at me to run, to turn, to look, to see what was behind me. But I didn't. I couldn't. Because I knew deep in my gut that if I looked, I wouldn't be able to look away. So instead, I did the only thing I could think of. I ran. I don't remember how far I went. I don't remember what direction I took. All I know is that I ended up in a showroom closet, slamming the door shut behind me, hands shaking as I pressed my back against the shelves. I stayed there for hours. My body curled into itself, my chest rising and falling in quick, shallow gasps, and at some point, I must have passed out. Because the next thing I knew, I woke up to the morning shift arriving. The store was bright again, filled with casual chatter, footsteps, and the sound of carts rolling across tile. For a moment, I just sat there, still curled up in the closet, my brain struggling to understand where I was. Then I remembered, and I almost threw up. Slowly, I pushed myself up, my body stiff and sore, and stepped out into the open. That's when I realized some of the day shift workers, people I had never met before, were looking at me like I had just escaped from a psych ward. And honestly, I felt like it. Then I saw Tom. He was standing by the checkout lanes, arms crossed, watching me with an expression that wasn't concerned or surprised, just tired, like he'd seen this before, like he had expected it. I swallowed, trying to form words, but before I could say anything, he spoke first. "Impressive yelling," he said, voice casual, "but next time, it has to be even louder." I stared at him. My mind barely processed what he meant, and then the realization hit me like a truck. Whatever was breathing behind me had almost had me. If I hadn't screamed, if I hadn't made myself as loud as possible, I might not have made it out. My hands started shaking again. For the first time since I started working here, I was seriously considering quitting. I should have, but I didn't. By my second week, I had adjusted, or at least, I told myself I had. I had a routine now, music in my ears all night to block out the intercom. The lights, I knew how to handle them. Section 34 didn't exist to me anymore. And the breathing thing from the other night? I refused to think about it. I followed the rules like my life depended on it, because deep down, I was starting to suspect that it did. That night, I was restocking candles when I felt it. A light tap on my shoulder. I flinched so hard that my earbuds flew out, spun around instinctively. And there, standing in front of me, was a man. He wasn't familiar. Not Tom, not a coworker. A customer. He stood too casually, cradling a blue IKEA bag against his hip. His clothes were neat but oddly featureless, like the kind of outfit you'd put on a mannequin. But his face was completely normal. That was the worst part. He didn't look scary or threatening. He just looked average. Too average, like someone had pieced together a generic human being from a catalog. And then he spoke. "Excuse me, miss," he said, his voice calm and pleasant. "Are the candles sold individually or in bulk?" I didn't answer. I couldn't. My throat had locked up, my breath stuck somewhere between my lungs and my mouth. Because I knew the rules. I was supposed to be alone. There were no customers here after closing. There shouldn't be anyone here but me. The air around me thickened, turning stagnant. A primal, awful part of my brain was screaming at me to run, to get away from him. But instead, I did the only thing I could think of. I turned around, and I walked away. I shoved my earbuds back in, cranking my music so loud it made my head pound. I focused on my work, pushing my cart to the next aisle, ignoring the man completely. It took everything in me not to look back. But a few minutes later, tap, tap. Another light touch on my shoulder. I turned, and he was there again. Standing just a little too close, same calm smile, same pleasant voice. "Excuse me, miss," he repeated. "Are the candles sold individually or in bulk?" I forced myself to breathe evenly. I ignored him. I moved to another aisle, kept restocking, didn't react, didn't acknowledge him. But every time I stopped to grab something, every time I bent down to place an item on the shelf, every time I let my guard slip for even a second, he was there. I tried not to let it get to me. Tried to focus on my work, on the simple, mindless task of stacking and organizing. But the longer it went on, the harder it got. Because no matter how many aisles I moved to, no matter how many times I pretended not to notice him, he never left. And the worst part, he never got angry. Never changed his tone. Never did anything threatening. Just stood there, patient and persistent, waiting for me to acknowledge him. At one point, I was carrying a box of glassware, trying to keep my hands from shaking when I turned too fast. And the box went right through him. I dropped it. The sound of shattering glass echoed through the empty store, sharp and sudden. My breath hitched, my body went cold, and the man just stood there, expression unchanged, like nothing had happened, like the box had never touched him, like he wasn't real. Which of course, he wasn't. My mind screamed at me to run, to get out, get out, get out. But somehow, I forced myself to stay still, to take a slow, measured breath, to act like nothing was wrong. I bent down, picking up a shard of broken glass, pretending to focus on cleaning it up. But really, I was just trying to stop my hands from shaking. And out of the corner of my eye, I saw him tilt his head slightly, like he was curious, like he was waiting for something. I ignored him. I picked up the shards. I swept up the mess, I moved on, and he kept following me. For the rest of the shift, he trailed behind me, always just a few feet away. Never closer, never farther. Just there. Every time I turned a corner, I half expected him to disappear. But he never did. Finally, when my shift ended, I walked to the employee exit, trying to act like I wasn't seconds from bolting. And when I reached the back doors, I paused. Because for the first time all night, the man wasn't behind me. He was already there, standing by the exit, watching, waiting. I stood there for a long time, fingers curled into fists, breath shaky and uneven. He didn't move, didn't blink, didn't ask the question again, just stood there. And somehow, that was worse. I swallowed hard, forced my feet to move forward and stepped through the door. He didn't follow. I didn't look back. I just walked to my car, climbed inside, and sat there, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. And that night, as I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, heart still hammering in my chest, I kept hearing his voice. Soft, pleasant, unchanging. "Excuse me, miss, are the candles sold individually or in bulk?" By my final night, I was so used to the horrors of this place that I barely reacted to them anymore. The intercom, music loud enough to rupture my eardrums, kept it at bay. The lights, unscrew the bulb. Don't look back. Keep moving. The man, he still followed me. Still tapped my shoulder. Still asked the same question, but at some point I stopped caring. Maybe that was the scariest part. I had gotten used to it. The way the store tried to bend reality around me. The way it seemed to wait for me to mess up. So when my shift ended that night, I didn't hesitate. I walked straight to the employee exit, already zoning out, my mind on the drive home, the cold bed waiting for me, the relief of escaping for just a few more hours. And then I opened the door, and my soul left my body. It wasn't the parking lot. It was another IKEA. Identical. Empty. I stood there, frozen, the door half open, my body refusing to move. The air felt wrong. Heavy. Thick. Like it was pressing against my skin, seeping into my lungs. The lights weren't off, but they were dimmer. Everything had a faint yellow tint, like an old photograph left in the sun too long. And the furniture. Some of it looked used. Couches slumped, like someone had just been sitting there. Bed sheets were rumpled, pillows indented with the shape of a head. The cutlery displays had forks and knives missing, as if someone had taken them and eaten a meal here. My stomach twisted. Someone had been here. Or worse, someone still was. I stepped back, slower than I ever had in my life, and slammed the door shut. Held my breath, counted to 3. Then, slowly, I opened it again. The twisted IKEA was still there. I slammed it again, opened it, still there. A sickening wave of nausea rolled through my stomach. I felt like I was gonna throw up. My fingers trembled as I grabbed the handle, my entire body running cold. I tried again, and again and again, and every time, the same impossible, distorted version of IKEA stared back at me. 30 minutes passed. I don't know why I kept checking the door. Maybe I thought I'd gone insane. Maybe I already had. I don't remember when the panic turned into exhaustion, when the shaking turned into cold acceptance. I was stuck. Stuck inside a place I wasn't meant to be. And if I kept standing here hoping for a way out, I was gonna die in here. I don't remember the moment it changed. I just remember opening the door for what felt like the 100th time. And suddenly, there it was. The parking lot. The twisted, wrong IKEA was gone. The fluorescent streetlights flickered outside, and my beat-up car sat in the same place I'd left it, a small comfort in this nightmare of a shift. I took a step forward, then another. The cold night air hit my face, fresh and sharp, and my breath came out in a shaky, uneven gasp. I kept walking, didn't run, didn't look back. I don't think I even allowed myself to think. Not until I reached my car. Not until I climbed inside, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. Not until I sat there, staring at the bright, innocent-looking IKEA sign glowing against the dark sky. And that's when it hit me. I had barely escaped. Maybe I wasn't supposed to. I don't know what's wrong with the store. I don't know what would have happened if I had stepped into that wrong IKEA. But I know one thing. If you ever work at IKEA, think twice. And if you do, follow the rules.